This is a production of PBS Charlotte.
This week on Unspun, Trump's first 100 days. He's signing executive orders and closing the borders, laying off federal workers, cutting off federal funding, and ticking off federal judges. Change is what the president promised in his first 100 days, but is it too much, too soon? And what about the media's first 100 days? Does more access to Trump than Biden mean more balance or more bias? We'll talk about it with political analyst Chuck Todd. Plus, I'll count down the top 5 things politicians will not tell you about the media.
In today's America, welcome to the spin game. Believe me, I know, I'm Pat McCrory. When I was governor and mayor, I played the spin game. I was played by the spin game. But aren't we all done being spun? Let's take the spin out of the world we're in, here on Unspun.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us, and welcome to Unspun, a show that tells you what politicians are thinking but not saying. Ever since the early days of FDR and the New Deal, we've been measuring new presidents by what happens during their first 100 days in office, both the good and the bad. Reagan negotiated the release of American hostages from Iran on day 1 and survived an assassination attempt on day 69. JFK's failed invasion of Cuba was on day 87. Ford's pardon of Nixon came on day 31. But President Trump says nothing quite compares to his first 100 days.
And we're here tonight in the heartland of our nation to celebrate the most successful first 100 days of any administration in the history of our country, and that's according to many, many people.
Trump says the media can't ignore the slowing of illegal border crossings to near zero, and the polls show that shows support for shrinking the size of government and reducing government waste. But despite those early wins, the White House found out very quickly that you can't win them all when Trump started talking about tariffs.
We're going to have so much money coming in from tariffs.
Tariffs on pharmaceuticals,
Tariffs on steel, car tariffs,
hundreds of billions of dollars in tariffs,
substantial tariffs, 10% tariffs, 25% tariffs, 50% tariffs.
World leaders are trying to figure out how to respond to President Trump's attempt to reshape the global economy. How are average Americans likely to feel the impact of this?
higher prices. Now the president of the United States is saying, no, that was a bad deal. It hurt Americans. We're going to go in a different direction.
Yeah, President Trump didn't have much of a choice when new tariffs sent the stock market into a nosedive, along with his own approval ratings. And that's when President Trump's first 100 days started looking more like his worst 100 days. So what about the next 100 days? Will the White House bounce back, or is the honeymoon over? Joining us now to talk about Trump's wins and losses so far is one of our favorite guests here at Unspun, Chuck Todd. He's the former chief political analyst for NBC News and longtime host of Meet the Press, who's covered the White House for NBC during the Obama administration. And Chuck's recently relaunched his political podcast called the Chuck Toddcast. Chuck, it's great to see you again, and always great to have you here on Unspun.
Pat, always a pleasure. I always enjoy our conversation.
You know, I'm curious to ask you, in Trump's 100 days, which stories do you think weren't covered enough by the media?
Well, and again, you and I were just joking about this one. I don't know what the media is these days, meaning like when we say the media, right, I think what you're referring to and I'm referring to of our generation, the major broadcasters, Times, Post, things like that, that might be only 20 or 30% of the entire media landscape anymore, right? Because you have the amplifiers, partisan amplifiers on podcasts and YouTubes. You got people like me who've gone independent, people like yourself who are independent operators. So, but in general, here's what I would say, right? It's almost, I think you have to put it all together and you say to yourself, what's broken through? I think two stories have broken through the most, and that is likely the border and the various efforts to deal with the border, whether it's lawsuits, and obviously the tariffs. So if you were to ask me what hasn't gotten enough coverage, I would say number one is Ukraine and Russia, right? The failed attempts there to get that ceasefire, the struggle with that. I think that to me, and I may be speaking for myself because I'm really worried about that situation for Ukraine. But that's the story I feel like that has gotten the least amount of coverage and attention. It's there if you look for it, but it is not 1A and 1B, which arguably tariffs and the border have become.
Is that maybe why media is not covering it, because they don't have the funds to cover overseas wars nowadays
that's a fair
compared
point.
to Vietnam
we don't,
and Walter
we don't have
Cronkite?
we listen to me. NBC's not spending the same amount of money it did to cover this war that they did 3 years ago, and they're not alone. This is not an NBC thing, right? This is just the truth.
Yeah, yeah. What about some stories that have been overcovered? Because there's new stories every single day.
Yeah, I mean, I will tell you, I think there's a lot of wasted time about Trump third term. I find that to be a manufactured story by journalists. Like, there's plenty of stories that Trump manufactures as distractions, and he's really good at it. I actually think it's a media obsession. You know, I always say this about Trump. If you're a journalist and you want to mess around with the news cycle, Donald Trump's a great interview, right? Because you can ask, the thing with Trump is he'll accept any premise. I mean, I've joked, I'm pretty sure I could say to him, you know, Mr. President, isn't it strange that Japan is not a state? We won that war. We dropped 2 nuclear weapons. And he'd probably say, you know, you're right. And then what headline could you create? You know, Donald Trump wonders why Japan isn't an American, stronghold. Does he really going to do it? No. Is it something he hadn't thought about? Probably not. But you can plant. It is far too easy to plant ideas in his head that he'll accept the premise of in the given moment, that I think sometimes journalists are a bit irresponsible about it, to be frank.
So during the first 100 days, there's this perception, and I need to find out if it's reality or not, about the battle between the White House press corps and the Trump White House. Is it any different from the first Trump term, or is it really different this time?
Well, I would say you have a press office. In the Trump first term, they were taking incoming, right? It was a fire hose. They were reacting. They weren't prepared. This one is certainly prepared to engage, and they have a plan. But I don't know if they're interested in disseminating information to anybody outside their own supportive media. And I think they've made a mistake here. I think I think the reason why their poll numbers are so low is they're trying so hard to own the libs all the time, and they've sort of turned the White House press shop into a YouTube show, if you will, right? And almost like an extension of Charlie Kirk or something like that. And I think the base loves it, right? And I think it can create, and there's a whole bunch of people who love Trump already that love it. But I actually think it's been an ineffective way to communicate to people that aren't Trump acolytes. And this White House still hasn't figured out how to talk to people that aren't people that would go to a rally.
What do you think about the generational change right now in the Trump White House? You've got a 28, 29-year-old press secretary. You've got a 40-year-old vice president. Is that changing things here? We've got the oldest president we've ever had, I believe. He and Biden are about the same age.
Right.
But there's a generational change, not just among the media, but about who's being covered also. Is that changing things based upon the first 100 days? A feisty White House press secretary, I might add.
Sure, who was also a candidate for office herself, right, once. And I wonder how much, we haven't often had somebody in the press secretary slot who at one time ran for office, right? That's a different skill set than parrying stuff back and forth. There are times that I often think she sees herself as a candidate rather than as a spokesperson.
I've got to ask you about the battles within the media during this first 100 days. I remember you had your own editorial comment, which was extremely risky for you on NBC during Meet the Press, where you made some very strong comments in the past. We just had CBS anchor during 60 Minutes make very strong comments. Right. Is this all about Trump, or is it about changing the media?
Oh, I think it's the changing media. I mean, look, Trump is just exploiting the relationship between journalists and their corporate parents. And that's what look, Trump has always believed you should pressure owners in order to get the outcome that you want, whether it's a sports team. Notice when he weighed in on Shedeur Sanders, he addressed owners. He didn't address GMs. He didn't address coaches. He addressed owners. He believes that, when he was mad about the Washington Post in his first term, he went right at Jeff Bezos, right? So he likes to deal with the owners. So the point is that I just think that's exploited tension that was already building, right? There's been this, look, do the news divisions need to make money, or do the news divisions need to just not lose money? Is the corporate parent going to have the legal back of its news division or not? And I think what we've seen this year is that you had, these media companies who are very nervous about government regulation, and President Trump's comfort with using government to essentially get involved with business decisions. An attitude, by the way, that I'm old enough to remember wasn't called conservative, but I think it is really he's exploiting the tension that always has existed between the journalists and the corporate parent. I think right now being a news division under the umbrella of a publicly traded company is very precarious and very troublesome.
In the final 30 seconds here, does Congress even matter anymore regarding how we govern and also media coverage?
So
because it's all about
that.
Trump.
I completely agree, and I think the lack of, some of this is members of Congress are certainly trying to duck the media. They don't want a lot of attention because Republicans, you and I both know this, last I checked, you're an old free trader, right? And there's a lot of free trader Republicans up there that don't like this tariff stuff, but are afraid of saying negative things to the base of the Republican Party that will then bite them in the you-know-what. So I do think, here's my hope. History shows us this, Pat. Whenever we have too much of one thing, the country suddenly wants something else. So look at what Canada did. They went from, this sort of, Mr. Charisma, Mr. Personality, and Justin Trudeau, who in some ways probably was a little too slick, to a guy who's a technocrat, a banker. I wonder if all of this focus on the executive branch sobers up the American public and sobers up the next Congress to say, you know what? Congress is Article 1 for a reason in the Constitution, and Congress is an equal branch of government. And they have a lot more say-so on the purse than you might believe watching the way this White House interacts with this Congress. So I wonder if we're at a low of Congress sort of being involved in the governing of the country. I wonder if that starts to change.
Well, Chuck, I'll call you in the next 100 days and we'll examine, will Congress make more of a difference during the next 100 days of the Trump White House and the media? I appreciate you again being on the show, and you bring great insight. I really appreciate it.
You got it.
Next up, PBS Charlotte's Jeff Sonnier takes Unspun on the street, asking what do voters think of Trump's first 100 days?
Yeah, success or failure probably depends on whether you voted for Trump or against Trump. Supporters say the president's doing exactly what he promised to do, and opponents say that's the problem, that he's doing more harm than good. The first 100 days of the Trump administration, do you like what you see or do you not like what you see?
I don't like what I see, but it was expected. I'm a little surprised at the lack of pushback from the other branches of government to allow it to happen in the land of the free and home of the brave. So I'm quite disappointed.
I think it's been a success because I like his stand on immigration. Our father immigrated from Italy many years ago, well, in 1920, and there were legal ways to come to America, and there always have been.
What I would say is it's, like putting a timestamp on somebody's 4 years is slightly, it's a wrong, measuring stick there, because the moment you say 100 days, that means, are we saying everything needs to be completed in 100 days? There's been a start of a few things, like the tariffs, but we saw where, they were pulled back.
With the tariffs, I think some of them are a little too strict. I think he was expecting too much. He's got a very short period of time and a lot he wishes to accomplish.
Agreed?
Yes.
Well, he claimed that he was going to do certain things, and he's been doing it ad nauseum.
Yeah, 100 days may or may not be a fair measure of success or failure in the White House, but most agree that what they've seen so far, they're expecting to see a lot more of over the next 4 years. Pat?
I'll tell you, Jeff, that's great feedback. So what do you think about the issue? Let us know by tagging PBS Charlotte when you post on social media about this week's show. Let us know what you like and don't like about tonight's program. All right, tonight on our Unspun Countdown, the top 5 things politicians will not tell you about the media. Let's start out with number 5. Number 5, politicians are often the anonymous sources. Yep, when you hear a media member say, we hear from a high public official on what the inside scoop is, guess who that high public official is? It's the politician. Number 4, politicians often entertain together with the media. Yep. Politicians are always critical of the media, but in Washington, D.C., it's a small town. They party together, too. Number 3, politicians love TV appearances. There's a long line of politicians in office calling up CNN and PBS and NBC and CBS. Can I be on your talk show? Number 2, the politicians, all politicians, including myself, think if you talk to the media and are friendly with the media, sooner or later the media will like you. It doesn't work that way. And number 1, almost all politicians after they retire want to go work for the media. PBS Charlotte's Jeff Sonnier joins me now for Unspun One-on-One.
Okay, so I'm watching the top 5. You really wanted to work in the media, huh?
I knew it was an option afterwards because I'd had several media people approach me, and then NBC called me, and then I'm really appreciative of WTVI calling me.
This feels more like be careful what you ask for.
Well, especially not knowing you or the guy. You know, my old nemesis reporter back when I was mayor. Yeah. I can't let go of you.
Well,
right
here we are. We're stuck together.
They just pulls me back again like the Godfather 3.
We're stuck here together. Hey, let me ask you about the media. You and Chuck talked about this during the interview. How much has the media changed from your point of view, from when you were in the mayor's office, when I was asking you questions, to the governor's office, to what we're seeing today at the White House?
The main change is coverage. There's not a lot of media resources to cover the news. Most of media now gives opinion because it's cheaper. But when I was mayor and city council member, we literally, and you knew this when working for SOC and other stations, our city council chamber would be full of media.
Yeah.
We'd have 6 networks there. Now there is very little coverage of local politics. When I was governor, it was really the last major years of the Charlotte Observer having a lot of reporters and the AP reporters. They would be very, very active, especially with scrutiny against me. Now you see very few reporters, even in Raleigh. So it's changed dramatically, and new media has taken over.
So when you're not face to face with a reporter like it used to be, how does that change how you deal with the public, what you say, and how you massage issues?
I don't think that's changed much because the fact of the matter is it's made it easier for Zooming. I used to have to go to Wilmington to get on Wilmington TV or to Asheville to get on Asheville TV or Charlotte and Raleigh because we had 3 or 4 different major networks or viewing areas. Now you can do it all by Zoom. So in a way, COVID changed media coverage because Zoom became acceptable.
Yeah, and we all kind of accepted the fact that we can't be face-to-face, so it's okay if you're asking your questions from afar over an online
People are comfortable with it. In fact,
yeah.
just having Chuck Todd here by Zoom is much easier than he having to fly here and me having to fly up to New York or D.C.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you about coverage in the first 100 days versus the rest of an administration.
Yeah.
Is there a honeymoon? Do you get a break from the media? Does it get worse as time goes on? How did it work in your experience, and how do you think it generally works?
I never had a honeymoon as governor, believe me. From the very first day, I was being attacked. But I got to say, most politicians feel that way. But I'm saying the truth. It was me being attacked on the first day. I think some people get a honeymoon and others don't. But now with new media and a much more diverse media, from conservative to liberal to libertarian, even overseas media by Zoom, I think the days of honeymoon are over, because conflict causes clicks.
And I get the sense that a narrative is formed in those early days, and it's tough to change the narrative, I would think, from the point of view of an elected official.
Well, actually now the media is much more segregated by narrative. So one person's narrative, I mean, I cut on one channel on TV or podcast, and it's a whole different news story than being covered on someone else's. So the narrative used to be set by the three major networks. Now it's tougher to set a narrative, actually.
So at the White House, you're coming out of a presidency, Biden, where he didn't do a lot of interaction with the media, didn't do many interviews, everything was scripted. Trump is the most unscripted president we probably have. Does that change the balance of coverage? Does it change the bias of coverage? Does it make a difference?
It's like 180 degrees difference between Biden and Trump. And I think Trump has the skill to work with the media, but he also has one of the faults of the media, or of politicians, which I had. And that is, you think if you have more exposure to the media will start liking you for letting you come into the Oval Office. Actually, I saw with Biden, and I also saw this with Governor Cooper. It was very tough to get to Governor Cooper. So media was even nicer to them, so they could get the rare interview with Governor Cooper, or also with Joe Biden. So there's kind of almost reverse psychology. If you're too accessible, the media actually can get meaner toward you.
If you're easy to get to, there's no reason to be nice to you.
There's no threatening. You're not going to be threatened by being kicked out of the office. I mean, just this week, he went on ABC and did a primetime interview. But the difference with Trump, he's not afraid to jump on the media. And as I often say, too, is doing a live interview versus a taped interview makes a big difference to the politician.
Here's another change. You've got Trump tweeting in the middle of the night, and a lot of time that creates the next morning's headlines. You've got reporters whose stories on X and Twitter get more eyeballs than the stuff they're posting on, in the media or in print. So how does that change the story, and how does that change, from a politician's point of view, to be more effective?
Well, now with the internet, media headlines can change like that. When I was mayor and governor, you had to call up the News and Observer, the AP, the night before to make sure the headline was different the next morning. You didn't know what the headline was going to be that morning, or you had to wait till the 6 o'clock and 11 o'clock news. And I would call you, Jeff, at WSOC in the old days and go, hey, Jeff, I think that story's unfair. You need to change it for 11. Well, now even in local news covers, there's 4, 5, and 6 news coverage and 10 and 11 news coverage. And it's on the internet. So it can change within a minute, but the danger is all these stories last for such a small period of time now. The news cycle is much shorter than the old days. The old days of, 5 to 10 years ago.
And last question, kind of stemming from your interview with Chuck Todd, 2 stories that kind of popped were the immigration and tariffs. Can a president or a governor do too much in the first 100 days? I know Reagan was credited with having a successful first 100 days because he focused on one thing, the economy. Do you want to focus on one thing, or is it you're trying to do as much as you can as fast as you can?
I think Trump's making a mistake I made as governor. I changed like 10 to 15 things. Governor Martin was much smarter than I was. He had 3 goals during his 8 years, and he met the 3 goals. I had 15 to 20 goals. And by the way, I met over 15 of them, of the 20. But I stepped on a lot of toes, and when you do that, your negatives go up, and that's what's happening with Trump right now.
Well, 15 out of 20 ain't bad.
I'd be a multimillionaire in baseball.
Thanks, Governor.
Thank you. 60 Minutes may be the most famous news show in TV history, but now it's making news for all the wrong reasons. The host of 60 Minutes, Scott Pelley, is calling out his non-news bosses, accusing them of interfering with the program's stories and interviews for business and political reasons. It all started when President Trump sued CBS, accusing 60 Minutes of inappropriate influence of the election by editing its TV interview with Kamala Harris, making Harris look better during the final days of the campaign. Now, I don't know how the Trump lawsuit will turn out, but I do know firsthand that what you say on 60 Minutes isn't always what the audience sees on 60 Minutes.
When I heard about the Dan River plant having a coal ash spill, my first reaction was, wait a minute, that plant's been closed for years. Why are we having a spill at a plant that's not even open?
Tell everybody how much the fine was.
I don't have that list, but again,
It was $99,111, which
correct.
does not sound like a big fine.
it wasn't a big fine.
Well, that was me on 60 Minutes when I was governor, when they edited my interview, cutting off my explanation of why North Carolina coal ash fines were so low. Well, politicians, including me, know the risk when you're sitting down for a taped interview with 60 Minutes or meeting with the editorial board of a newspaper. You know that editors can pick and choose what they use and don't use on TV or in print. That's why so many politicians now choose instead to appear on a live Sunday talk show or a podcast online. A live interview is still risky, but at least there's no editing. Meanwhile, Paramount, which owns CBS, worries that any bias on their marquee news program could affect their big media merger, which needs government approval. That's why 60 Minutes is feeling pressure from Paramount, because Paramount fears payback from the president. So this Sunday night, when you see that stopwatch tick, tick, ticking, don't ignore all the politicking that's going on in the background as 60 Minutes morphs into Family Feud or maybe Let's Make a Deal. Well, that's the reality as I see it. I hope you'll come back next week as we tell you what politicians are thinking but not saying, right here on Unspun. Good night, folks.
A production of PBS Charlotte.